Hey Tara, welcome to this week's catch-up. I'm looking forward to touching base with you about the multiple things that are taking place in our country. But at first, Amakos are back. We're feeling it. It's happening. This week we won. And I'm so glad we got drawn against Sundowns. Because I think Sundowns last time we played cheated. We need VAR. We were robbed there. No allegations to chairperson, anyone. I just want to say this is football. They say football is not a matter of life and death. It's much more than that. Now that's just a joke. But I hope we look forward to playing Sundowns in the next game. We've got a game this weekend, so Amakosi are on the rise. But let's begin with a number of key issues I want us to unpack in this next while, because we got a lot to talk about. Looking at sport, I want to look at our women's cricket team. Man, Wolfart and a number of those women did an incredible job for us. Here they came as a team from absolutely having played. I went to their final when they played at the Wanderers. I was so proud of them. I thought they did an incredible job. And then for them to make it to this final, having beaten Australia, says so much about the mettle that the women have shown in sport. I am so super proud of them. Except I have one beef with this whole event. First and foremost, why was the Minister of Sport not there? You see, Honorable Gayton McKenzie is fine with going to the Springboks, because you know what? Media attention, all of those things. It's fine with going to the Paris Olympics. But here were a team, a national team, that's managed to get to the finals, and he didn't go. Now, yeah, you might debate there are not of cost issues, there's all sorts of those things. But if we are already spending money on going to other sports, surely this was an opportunity to highlight a sport that not many South Africans are even conscious of, watching all the time, that says this is what government exists to do. It's easy to celebrate those who are celebrated. It's easy to be seen with those who already people are conscious of. But here is a women's team that could do with all of our support. And I thought it was a miscalculation to not go. You can still go at a fraction of the cost. And more crucially, it says everything about the lip service we play to women's support in this country. You see, we can talk until the cows come home about let's empower women, let's make them, let's protect, all of those things. Until we actually do practical things, all of it is meaningless talk. Therefore, here are just some key things. You know, the other day I was sitting in a portfolio committee and we asked the question, how many women businesses are being paid? And you know, in procurement, you work out that it's just less than 20% of businesses owned by women are able to procure services from the state, at least looking at Q2 of this financial year. We can talk about gender-based violence, but when you ask, where are the courts? Where's all of that? We talk. This is half the dilemma with this country. There is enough talk. What we need to do is show action. I would argue the case to say that women who are empowered, educated, able to thread to school, start their businesses, trade, participate in sport, thrive, that's our way of showing empowerment, and that's our way of saying that we are in pursuit of equality. It must be disappointing for all of us when we fail. And I can remember a number of years ago having the similar conversation about Banyana Banyana. Back then, many of them were not being paid comparably with their male counterparts. When I look at the rugby team, I often find that the women still have to do other jobs if they are going to keep playing rugby. Isn't it time that we look at a minimum salary if you play for any national team, male or female? That's equal. I accept the debate around sponsorships. Yeah, sure. Sponsors, players are going to be paid more because of their popularity. But at some level, we have to be able to say, if anyone wears a Springbok jersey in any sport, whether women's rugby, men's rugby, whether whatever, there must be equality of pay. Because when we achieve that at a minimum level, we demonstrate not only equality, but we show the immense support we can. I want my girls to grow up in this country knowing that the opportunities afforded to my son are the same opportunities afforded to them. And therefore, we cannot fail on this issue. And so to Wolfhard and the team, proud of you girls. And I'm going to keep fighting so that we can do more for equality of women and the equality of women in sport. This is an important fight. We lose it, we lose the next generation of athletes who are women. It is women who are the face of poverty. It is black women who are left, if you like, often particularly who represent the face of poverty. This is not good enough. We can't pay lip service. Let's do better. Moving right along. I want to look at elections in the SADC region. Oh, jeez. The Mozambique elections recently took place. And you know, for all the love of money, SADC has allowed elections that are rigged, elections that are not fair, to simply continue. They say it's just not good enough. I'm sorry. We were silent when Zimbabwean elections were being rigged, despite a report stating categorically that, in fact, by the former vice president of Zambia, who was on the election observer mission, saying the elections were rigged. Yet, our own president even went, attended, had this fanfare that simply said legitimized rigged elections. Now we are doing the same in Mozambique. Elections have been taking place in Mozambique, and already now we're seeing high levels of violence. We're seeing opposition leaders getting killed, and even the European Union, the African Union have all condemned the violence. But what is tragic is that, in fact, SADC have kept quiet. Because how can you be on one level condemning of atrocities taking place in Mozambique, but you would fail to do so when it was happening in Zimbabwe, and you even went and endorsed the sham of an election that Zimbabwe was? I think we've got to hold ourselves to much higher standards. We simply can't sit by when neighboring countries are having rigged elections. South Africa cannot be silent on this issue. This is not one of those where we can simply get by and say, well, silence does mean consent, or maybe if it does, it speaks ill of our willingness to uphold democratic practice. Fellow South Africans, this is a moment for all of us. Because trust me when I say this, when atrocities are being committed in other countries and you turn a blind eye, do not be disturbed when the same atrocities are inflicted in your own country and nobody comes to our aid. Yes, I hear it a lot. No, every country has its own sovereignty and all of that. But what is that when we then form these bilateral agreements? We stand up for dignity and the preservation of human rights, that when we think about democracy, we uphold the fact that all participants must be allowed the right to participate freely, including the opposition. If you fail to protect them, protect the opposition, you end up with scrupulous democratic practice, you undermine democracy, and more than anything, you ask citizens in those countries to continue to suffer from people who are not democratically elected. Where it affects each one of us is that this also speaks to an immigration issue. This also speaks to the fact that we cannot, by any matter of means, uphold easy trade with these countries. Because as democracy goes, so does our ability to do business in those countries. We've got to do better. We need leaders who are elected in democratic practices, institutions being protected, opposition being able to participate. I am a Democrat. I'm sick and tired of being surrounded by people who are not Democrats. As someone once asked me in Zimbabwe, they said, how do you build democracy without Democrats? We cannot allow this to move on to Mozambique and other parts. Last week, I had an opportunity to ask the President as we prepare towards the midterm budget policy statement. The MTBPS is an important part. It signals government's priorities in the next number of months. It takes its cue from the government's strategic framework, but it also tells us effectively where money will be spent in the next while. Now, it's an important policy statement for us to make. But one of the key issues is the fact that we're facing a serious crisis between state-owned companies. Because if you look at the last number of years, we've bailed them out to over a tune of 500 billion rands, which are clear indicators that not only are they poorly led in certain instances, but they are bleeding the fiscus. We can allocate as many bailouts as possible, but SOEs are a big risk to South Africa. But along with that, what we've got to do is to eradicate what is wasteful and fruitless expenditure. Now, I just finished a meeting with the Auditor General, and I've had a look at what the last number of years look like. And in truth, departments have not been helping us in this regard. We are talking in the tens of billions of rands that are wasted through fruitless and wasteful expenditures. Now, key to this issue is what leadership do you give? I always tell people, if you want to buy a company, you don't just buy the value of the company, you buy its management. If you want to look at SOEs and see where they are failing, you look at their management. Take Transnet as an example. In the last number of years, it's been high in as far as fruitless and wasteful expenditure. Its leadership, while was there, has failed, and that's why we had to have a National Logistics Crisis Committee, which tells you that when leaders fail, institutions fail, and the culture in the organization is set in such a way that it doesn't uphold transparency. Here's a leadership issue. We now have one of the most biggest cabinets that we've had in democratic history. It's one of the largest in the world, and it's becoming more and more expensive. In truth, when you look at how much we pay people just in each of the respective ministries, we now get over 600 million rands. When you start to get around VIP protection, deputy ministers, all sorts of perks, it's an expensive business. It's over the billions of rands. Now ask the president a very simple question. Mr. President, why can't we just commit to cutting deputy ministers? Nobody knows what they do. Now, sure, we've got many of them, but in truth, they don't even deputize for a minister when a minister is not there. Another member of cabinet does that. They don't themselves can't enter necessarily into contract agreements. It's just a way of keeping the executive big. And when we look at this current organization or this, I am calling for us to make cuts. Parties campaigned on this issue going into the elections, but when it suited them, now suddenly people don't want to speak about this very important issue. It may not represent all the expenditure that goes into government, but what it does do, it speaks to the leadership question that says to us, how do we ensure that every rand is spent to South Africans, that we prioritize pupils rather than politicians, or patients in hospitals rather than politicians, or ultimately giving more policing to citizens than police to politicians. Those are the choices we're making. And therefore, again, I want to urge, let's act on this issue. Let's ensure we can deliver a fast, nimble, smaller cabinet. The president's response was simply to say, well, it's now a reality of what we are going to have. That's the state as we have it. But I'm worried, Mr. President. If we get more and more people sitting in cabinet, does it make it easier to make decisions? Does it make us much more effective? And more than anything, does it mean we save money for the people? Now is the time to part with the old and say, let's be nimble, let's be effective, and let's be quick. Let's dream of a new country. Let's focus all our resources on building for people, building infrastructure, building a country where schools are incredible. That's the dream. We've lost ambition in this country. I feel like we're just wanting to keep everybody happy and put them in cabinet. Why don't we pursue the ambition to genuinely transform society to a nation that prospers? I guess that's what we've got to be fixated on. So while I close, The former mayor of Joburg is being arrested. You know, previously you had leaders like President Mandela who came out of prison to become presidents. They went to prison for the right reasons. I'm worried there's a whole new bunch now who think going to prison for crime will be rewarded to some higher office. It's either you go to prison before, you go to prison after. Awa. Guys, we cannot be having leaders that are not ethical. And when we fail to vet people in their executive mayoralty, we tell youth that to be a politician is just to be connected, scrupulous, and we make the whole thing a space that lacks ambition for our citizens. We got to do better. I've asked over and over again, let's upend the quality of our leadership in this country. Let's make sure the best get to be there. You know, when you look at other countries, and I want to take China as an example, having a PhD, a master's, is not even enough for you to work for the state. You have to write a fairly cumbersome exam that makes sure that you are the most competent for that. That's in public service. When we go to democracies all over the world, we have to have an education system that produces leaders that are strong, that are competent. But furthermore, we've got to say to ourselves when we vote, let's upend it with ethical leadership. You can't have leaders who come out of prison or on their way to prison occupying executive office. It simply undermines the culture of an organization. And if there's any job for leaders, you set the culture. And if the culture is for corruption, trust me, the whole thing is corrupt. But if the culture is for excellence, pride, high ambition, man, what a great nation we could have. Re tla kopana next week.